up to me, some teenage girls, 2 sisters, and they come up and they said, Lou, Mr. Priolo, we read your book and we really enjoyed it. And I said, you enjoyed it? Most people don't enjoy my books, and because they're convicting. And she said, no, we really enjoy it, but have you ever thought of writing a book for teens? The thought never crossed my mind, so I thought that was a great idea. I went home and I pitched it to the publisher, and so basically this book, Keeping Your Cool, which has a lot of the same material we're going to be covering tonight and tomorrow morning, is a book that has the material from the heart of anger, but it's written to teenagers, like teenagers are the audience, and there's additional stuff in that book that's not in the heart of anger. In fact, tomorrow afternoon's workshop on disrespect, there's a whole chapter from the Keeping Your Cool book that we're going to talk about tomorrow afternoon in the workshop. But anyway, the heart of anger begins by taking this couple, Jim and Linda, into the counseling office. And I'd like you to sit in with me as I counsel. Linda and Jim sat across from me with tears in their eyes. They were frustrated because their 10-year-old son was so difficult to manage. Linda began their story. We can't control Joshua. He's determined to have his own way. We're embarrassed by how he talks to us. His teacher says he disrupts the whole class. She's even suggested that he may need to be placed on medication to control his behavior. We've tried disciplining him, but gave up when he got so angry that we became frightened. I feel guilty and ashamed because I failed as a mother. We don't know what to do, and I feel like there's no hope. We're so afraid that if Joshua doesn't get help now, he's going to be a first-class rebel in just a few years. Now, Jim and Linda, like many parents, had lost hope for one reason. They failed to see God's hand in their situation, in their trial. Our ability to find hope in a seemingly hopeless situation is directly related to our ability to see God's hand in that situation. And that's what happened to Jim and Linda. They'd forgotten that God would never ask them to do anything, especially something as difficult as bringing their children up in the discipline and instruction of the Lord without giving them all of the resources they needed to do what he said to do. And of course, this doesn't apply if you're not a Christian, but as George was saying, you're a Christian, you have the Holy Spirit, you have the Word of God. We can learn to do anything that the Bible says we must do. And yes, it's hard, and yes, it's difficult. But God promises to give us at least 3 resources. He promises, first of all, to give us the wisdom. If any of you in the very context of the trial lacks wisdom, let him ask of God, who gives to all men liberally and upbraideth not, and it shall be given him as long as he asks in faith. And then he promises to give us the ability, and in time he even promises to give us the desire to do the right thing. It is God, he's talking about the Holy Spirit there in Philippians. It is God who works in you both to make you willing and to make you able to do his good pleasure. Now the wisdom comes first. Usually you have to pray and read the Bible to know what to do. You can't do it unless you know what to do. So you have to ask the Lord for the wisdom first to be a good parent, how to deal with this particular parenting situation or that particular parenting situation. But then once he gives you the wisdom, you walk out in faith, and it's as you walk in faith, it's as you begin to do and follow the wisdom that God has given you is when he typically gives you the desire and the ability to do it. It says again in the book of James, the doer of the word will be blessed in the doing. You don't say, okay, Lord, give me the wisdom now, zap me and, let everything. No, as you walk in faith and follow the wisdom that he's given you, in the process of obeying that, that's when the grace comes. That's when the supernatural ability and desire to do what you couldn't possibly do in your own strength occurs. Well, now, Jim and Linda are sitting there, and they're wondering about this policy I've had. For years, I've had this policy about parenting children. And basically, the policy says that unless there's a crisis going on, or like a really urgent situation, an emergency, I typically am not going to spend time talking to the children unless I've had at least 2 sessions with mom and dad. Now, I'll tell you in a moment why I have that policy, but I'd like you to be thinking for the next few moments why I might have such a policy. So, Jim and Linda are sitting there, and the Bible says before you, if you answer a matter before you hear it, it's folly and shame unto you. So I'm sitting there, and asking them specific questions so that I can determine what the pathology is, what the problem is in the family. And of course, I'm a biblical counselor, so I'm not going to use the DSM-5. I'm not going to diagnose people's problems the way the world does. I'm going to diagnose people's problems not using the words that man's wisdom teaches, but that which the Holy Spirit teaches, interpreting spiritual problems in spiritual terminology. So I'm asking them questions, and they're answering my questions, and I'm trying to formulate a tentative diagnosis as to what might be going on with Josh. And so after 20, 30 minutes of asking these questions, I walk over to the whiteboard in my office, and I begin sort of explaining to them or writing out the patterns of behavior that they were describing to me about their son, about Joshua. They gave many examples of him being disrespectful, a lot of argumentation. He was clearly being antagonistic to his family, to his friends, some of his teachers. They described several temper tantrums that he had gone through, some verbal conflicts, even a few physical conflicts. And they didn't use this terminology, but as they were describing some of the behavior, it was clear he was being vindictive. I mean, he was paying people, he was returning evil for what he perceived was evil. And there were even a few acts of cruelty thrown in there. So at this point, I asked Jim and Linda this question. Can you see a common denominator in all of these behaviors that you have identified from them? They're looking at them in black and white on the whiteboard. And Linda said, yeah, it's anger. I never realized it before, but I guess you could say that Josh has a problem with anger. And then I agreed. I said, it looks like Josh may have developed some of the characteristics of the angry man described in the book of Proverbs. It says, for example, in 29:22, an angry man, now this is a type of person, an angry man stirs up strife. A hot-tempered man, another type of person, similar character, abounds in transgression. And you see this guy showing up. It could be a gal too. The angry man, right? Make no friendship with an angry man type of person, with a furious man type of person. You shall not go. Why? Lest you learn his ways and get a snare to your soul. And so at this point, I'm trying to explain to them the Bible's teaching about characterological sin. I mean, basically, the way this works, as you and I give ourselves over to a particular sin, more and more increasingly so, right? Our lives, our personality sort of takes on the characteristic of the sin that we've given ourselves over to. And to such an extent that at some point our life is characterized by that sin that we continually yield to over and over again. And to such an extent that when God looks at us, he characterizes us by the name of the sin that overtakes us, right? The Bible says, for example, according to Scripture, when an individual continually gives himself over to a sin, he eventually becomes bound by that sin. Okay, so the Bible talks in a lot of different places about how we are susceptible to become slaves to sin. Here's Romans 6:16. Do you not know that when you offer yourselves to someone to obey him, you are slaves of the one whom you obey, whether you're slaves of righteousness or obedience? And there's only two choices there. You know, we talk about addictive personalities. We all have addictive personalities. And either we are going to be addicted to one thing or the other. Either we're going to be addicted to sin, it's going to result in bondage, we're going to end up death, or we're going to be addicted to God, it's going to result in righteousness, so we're going to live. I mean, those are your options. Those are the only two options in the passage. But the point is, we are slaves and can become slaves to sin, and we are all slaves to sin apart from Christ. Only Christ has the power to free us from this bondage. John put it this way, Jesus put it this way, I tell you the truth, everyone who sins is a slave of sin. And Peter put it this way, for man is a slave to whatever has mastered him. And so you have this idea in the Bible that as we continually give ourselves over to a sin, the sin sort of takes over. So what does God call an individual who continually gives himself over to folly? I mean, we all do foolish things, we say foolish things, but you know, when our lives are characterized by foolish decision after foolish decision, then at some point we earn the title of being a fool. All right, good. So what is how does Scripture classify someone who gives himself over to drunkenness? God calls him a drunkard. All right? And what's the biblical name for a person who habitually steals? Kleptomaniac, right? No. It's a thief, right? And so in Joshua's case, sinful anger was apparently the dominant characteristic of his personality. And so, having tentatively diagnosed Josh as being an angry young man, I asked Jim and Linda another question. Can you think of a verse in the Bible that addresses angry children? And Jim said, yes, fathers, do not provoke your children to anger. And I said, that's right. In Ephesians 6:4, it says that rather than provoking our children to anger, we're required to bring them up in the discipline and instruction of the Lord. And then I take them to Colossians 3:21, where there's a parallel passage. It uses a different word. It says, fathers, don't exasperate your children that they may not lose heart or be discouraged. In that list of patterns in Joshua's life, you could also add apathy on there, because typically, not always, but often when a child is apathetic, it's a result of him being provoked to anger. Okay, so who's to blame? You know, Jim and Linda are maybe looking at me and thinking to themselves, and at this point I have to explain to them that I'm not a Freudian psychologist who's going to blame them for everything their kids do wrong. But they do have some culpability. They may have been a bigger part of the problem than they perhaps realize, but even if they're not a big part of the problem, they are responsible for a biblical solution. So they're certainly, regardless, in other words, of how much they provoked Josh to anger, they've got to make sure that in order to bring him up in the discipline and instruction of the Lord, their environment in the home is right. And so I basically explained to them, look, you know, Josh is a sinner. He's a little sinner. He's going to have to take full responsibility for his problem with anger. You guys can make it easy for him to change or difficult for him to change, but he's going to have to change whether you make it easy for him or not. But you guys also are responsible before God to create an environment around Josh that will make it easy for him to change. And to the degree, in other words, that you're provoking him to anger, you've got to stop. And to the same degree, you can make it easier for him to deal with his anger problem. And so basically, the rest of the first counseling session, as well as the one or two that may follow, I typically devote to identifying and removing these parental provocations from the house. Now, do you understand why I have that policy? If I have an hour a week with Josh, and I try to help him deal with his anger problem, even from the Bible, and mom or dad are out there pushing his buttons 167 hours a week, I mean, my impact on him is going to be diminished. And so I want to spend time with mom and dad to get the environment right so that when I send him back into the home, the environment is such to where they're not only not provoking him, but they're actually making it easier for him to change. And that's the other reason I want mom and dad there as much as possible, in most cases, throughout the whole counseling process, because it's not my job to parent your kids. It's not my job to shepherd your. I want you there so I can teach you how to shepherd your own children. And so for these two reasons, I really like to get the parents involved. And of course, you know, when I do this, the children realize very quickly, hey, good, you know, this is not drag Johnny in and throw him in the chair. You know, I've had this kid for 15 years and I can't do anything with him. I want you to fix him in 3 months. No. That's not the way biblical counseling works. Right? We're not just going to help Josh, we're going to help mom and dad deal with their issues. And when Johnny, or Joshua in this case, realizes that, mom and dad are going to be in the hot seat as much as he is, and that they've got another person, another adult, namely me, who's going to hold mom and dad accountable, then all of a sudden counseling doesn't seem so daunting to him. In fact, time and time again, what happens is the parents will report to me, well, this week, our son or daughter said, well, we need to go see Mr. Priolo. We got to talk to him about this stuff. I mean, and they do. They understand, you know, that we're going to deal with mom and dad's issues as well as their own issues. And it's a good deal for them. I mean, how many kids do you know have another adult, an advocate, who gets into the weeds with their parents and tries to help them stop pushing the kids' buttons? And so, like I said, it's really, really a good deal. All right, now, I want to talk to you for a moment about rebellion and the process of rebellion. Do you remember Linda said, I'm really afraid that if Joshua doesn't get help now, he's going to be a first-class rebel in just a few years. Well, that concern is not unfounded, especially when it comes to anger. There's a process involving anger that children go through, that all of us go through on our way to rebellion. And it involves being angry. And so if we don't learn how to deal with this characterological anger, it could end up in rebellion. And invariably, when a person rebels, they go through most of these steps, usually all of them, but invariably there is this anger that happens before the rebellion actually comes to fruition. So let me take you briefly through the process. The first thing that happens typically is a hurt. There's a wounded spirit, right? Proverbs 18:14 says, "Who can bear a wounded spirit?" The first step in this stairway to destruction is a hurt that is spawned by an offense. Now, the offense can be a real offense, and by that I mean it could really be a sin, or it can be a perceived offense. It could really not be a sin, and the child perceives it as a sin. You know, well, I'm angry at you because you didn't buy me, I'm hurt, I'm disappointed, whatever, because you didn't buy me the Jaguar I wanted for my 16th birthday. Well, I mean, it's not a sin for a parent not to buy child a Jaguar, unless, of course, they promised him the Jaguar, right? So parents do something, usually involving sin, but not necessarily, to the child whose mental and emotional response produces a hurt. And this hurt is the seed that, when cultivated, when it starts to and germinates and starts to grow into a root of bitterness. So basically, and that's the next step. Okay, so first is the hurt, and then there's the bitterness. So basically, when someone hurts you, someone offends you, you've got two choices. You can either pick that seed up and flick it away, or you can start to cultivate it. You can weed it and fertilize it, and you do that by dwelling on it over and I can't believe my dad, that he never wants me to have any fun. I can't wait till I can get out. And the more you dwell on it and play it from this perspective and that perspective, you cultivate that seed of hurt, and it grows into that root of bitterness. And of course, if the offense is not really a valid offense, then the child has to realize that he doesn't have a case against his parents because his parents really didn't sin. But one way or the other, he's going to have to pick that seed of hurt up and flick it away, or he's going to start to become bitter and ultimately angry. And what does it say? And by the way, what does it say in Hebrews 12:15? It says that we should be looking diligently lest any man fail of the grace of God, lest any root of bitterness springing up trouble us, and thereby many be defiled. And so again, bitterness is likened to a root in this passage of Scripture. Now, the next thing that typically happens is anger. You say, well, I would think anger comes before bitterness. I'm not talking about momentary anger. I'm talking about this characterological anger. I really wrote the book. You know, it's funny, I wrote The Heart of Anger years ago, and I had no idea it was going to be such a popular book. I mean, it's like a popular parenting book. I thought to myself, well, this will help a small niche of people. I had no idea God was going to use it the way He did. And the book is popular for two reasons. Not only, well, because there's a lot of angry kids in our society, but also a lot of angry parents. And parents read the book and they say, this book has helped my bought it for my kid, but I realize, I've got an anger issue, and the book helps me deal with my anger. But I wrote the book to help parents whose children were characterologically angry. And that's what we're talking about here. This is the anger that, again, becomes so habitual in the child's life that it becomes a part of his personality. And again, this is the type of anger that's so serious, the Bible says don't hang out with one of these people. Make no friendship with an angry man unless you learn his ways and get a snare to your soul. Now, Skip talked a moment ago about this next step. He talked about stubbornness. I want to unpack that a little bit for you. What does it mean to be stubborn? Rebellion is as the sin of witchcraft, and stubbornness is as iniquity and idolatry. So when you hear the word stubborn, the word can also be translated insubordination. So when you think of stubbornness or being insubordinate, how do you picture that? You remember the phrase you've probably heard since you were a kid if you grew up in the church, backsliding, right? Well, that's the idea. The idea is a backsliding heifer. What is a backsliding? I used to think, okay, this cow is like going down backwards on this slide. What does that mean? So I want you to picture you have this heifer, okay, or maybe this donkey, and she's got a rope, a leash around her neck, and her master's in front of her trying to coax her forward. And she takes her front two hooves and she jams them into the ground and does this action, as if to say, I'm not going there and you can't make me. I mean, that's what it means to be stubborn from a biblical perspective. And then there's the final step in the process, and that is what I call full-blown rebellion. Now, a rebellious child is a child whose characteristics have gone beyond that of the angry man. So he's still an angry man, but he's gone beyond that, and he's taken on the characteristics of the proverbial fool. If you look through the book of Proverbs, and there's even a few verses in Ecclesiastes, you'll see that the characteristics of a fool are basically the characteristics of a rebel. And so I want to take you through about 25 of these characteristics of a fool. But before I do, I want you to think about your favorite rebel. Now just, think about a rebel that you know or someone that you used to know, and just see how many of these characteristics fit your little or big rebel. Okay? First of all, he despises wisdom and instruction. Now, you're going to find this throughout the whole process of identifying the rebel, because the chief characteristic of a rebel is unteachable. You cannot teach him anything. He's wise in his own eyes. He's got an answer for everything. It is very, very hard to teach him anything. This is, as I said, I believe, the chief characteristic of a rebellious person and of a fool. The Bible says that the fool hates knowledge. He grieves his mother. He enjoys devising mischief. He's quick to anger. And there's a verse in Ecclesiastes that basically says he gives full vent to his anger. He's right in his own eyes. He hates to depart from evil. He's deceitful. He's arrogant and careless. He rejects his father's instruction. You see this theme that keeps on coming up? You just can't teach him. He won't listen. He despises his mother. He doesn't respond well to discipline, and that's why, basically it talks about this physical discipline, the correction of the stocks and the rod, because, and I'm going to talk about this tomorrow, about how we're supposed to instruct our children with the scriptures. But basically, reasoning will not work with him. You have to add something to the reasoning because he will not listen to reasoning alone. He does not understand wisdom. He has a worldly focus or a temporal value system, you might say. He grieves his father. He hurts his mother. He does not consider discussing any viewpoint but his own. A fool has no delight in understanding, but only in giving his own opinion. He provokes others to strife and anger by the things that he says. He has a smart mouth that usually or often gets him in trouble. He's quarrelsome or contentious. There's actually another Hebrew word. I have a book coming out later on this year, the Lord willing, on conflict resolution. And I devote a whole part of one chapter talking about this word contention. And there's actually another type of a person. You've all heard about the contentious woman. Well, there's a contentious man in the Bible too. And the idea is sort of as wood is to fire, as charcoal is to a piece of hot burning ember, so is a contentious man to kindle strife. If you're a contentious man, maybe 5 minutes or 10 minutes, but before too long, you're going to be in an argument or quarrel with somebody. There's some people that are just kind of born, they just manifest strife wherever they go. And of course, a fool is a person who often has this kind of attitude. He's always getting into contention with one person or another. He's a spendthrift. He often repeats his folly. He trusts in his own heart. He who trusts in his own heart is a fool, but he who walks wisely will be delivered. He can't resolve conflicts. And as I mentioned before, he gives full vent to his anger. All right, so I won't ask, but I mean, chances are your fool populate a lot of these categories. And you can see, I hope, that there is a real correlation between a person who is rebellious and a person who is a fool. I think Mike could be a fool without being a rebel, but it's hard to imagine how you could possibly be a rebel without populating this category. All right. Now, let's go ahead and start looking at some of these provocations, specific ways that parents tend to provoke their children to anger. The first one I want to mention is probably the one that I see most often, and I think it's probably the greatest provocation. And that has to do with the fact that a mother and father are not in harmony with each other. Again, I think this is the greatest cause of provocation amongst the children and the teens that I have counseled through the years. The Bible says, for this cause, the cause of marriage, a man shall leave his father and mother and shall cleave to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. Now, before I explain, let's talk for a moment about what it means to be one flesh. You read the word flesh in the Bible, and depending where you find it, you got all these different meanings of the word flesh. It's like one of those words that shows up, and it can mean this over here, and this over here, and this over here, and this over here. Well, what does it mean in the Genesis 2:24 passage? And by the way, as a marriage counselor, I can tell you without any fear of being wrong that virtually all marriage problems can be traced back to a violation of Genesis 2:24. Either failure to leave, failure to cleave, or as is most often the case, failure to become one flesh. This verse is actually repeated 4.5 times in the Bible. So it's a big deal. It's like the most important verse in marriage. But what does it mean to be one flesh? What does the word flesh mean? We use the word body in the same way. Every body in this room has an interest in being a better parent or grandparent, right? The word flesh here means person. It's the same way that the word is used in Genesis 6:17 when the Lord is talking to Noah about the flood. He says, I am going to destroy all flesh. So what does that mean? Like, did he just destroy the flesh and leave the skeleton? No, I'm going to destroy everybody. And that's the idea. When you get married, it's not that you lose your personality. It's not that one personality is absorbed into the other. But this is this amalgamation of two different persons functioning as one person. You know, the closest thing we have really to understand it, it's the Trinity, the Shema that Skip quoted. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is Echad. He's one. And the idea is a compound unity. And that's the idea. When a husband and wife get married, they're this sort of compound unit. They're two people functioning as one unit. And that's essentially what it means to become one flesh. And it's not just talking about physical, right? It's talking about a physical union, but it's also talking about a spiritual union. It's talking about an emotional union. It's talking about a philosophical union. Do we have the same? Are we one flesh when it comes to handling our finances? Are we one flesh when it comes to raising our children? I mean, all of these things are involved in becoming one flesh with our spouse. And so here's the way it's supposed to work. When husband and wife get married, they become a family. Before the children come along, they're a family, they are one flesh. And then the children come along, and the children, of course, are part of the family, but the children are not one flesh with mom and dad. I don't care how much you love your parents or your kids, you never were, never will be one flesh with them, at least not in the biblical sense. The relationship between the husband and wife is supposed to be a permanent relationship. I mean, it's intended for man to leave and a woman to leave. In fact, the word leave and cleave in Genesis 2:24, I mean, both in the New Testament and the Old Testament, the words that are used there are very strong words. They're actually translated elsewhere in the Bible as to abandon or to forsake. It's not like I'm leaving to go to the supermarket and I'll be back in an hour or two. It's like I'm leaving to go to Afghanistan and I'm not sure when I'll be back. It's a very, very strong kind of word. The relationship between the parent and child is temporary. It's temporary in the sense that the children are going to leave someday, and at that point, the relationship is going to be changed. It's sort of like this bottle of water, of which I'm about to partake. This bottle of water serves a function to hold the water, but when the water is consumed, then the bottle will be recycled and it'll be turned into something else. Now, I'm not talking about recycling our parents when they get old, but I mean the point is our function changes, right? And we don't relate to the bottle the same way we did once it's become something else. And that's the idea. It's a totally different kind of relationship. It's temporary. We always have to honor our parents, the Bible says, but thankfully, we don't always have to obey them. Right? And so when we leave, the authority and submission part of the relationship is broken. And we do have to honor them, but we leave to form a new decision-making unit for Christ and become the heads of our own families. And so the relationship at that point changes from this authority and submission structure to this friendship structure, or this brother and sister in Christ. It becomes a totally different kind of relationship. The relationship between the husband and wife is therefore the priority relationship in the home. And as important as it is to spend time with your kids, it's a secondary relationship compared to the former. In other words, the husband and wife, they are one flesh. They are the priority relationship in the home. The relationship between either parent and the children is a secondary relationship. Now, obviously, that doesn't mean you're going to spend more time with your spouse than you are with your children. But it's a matter of how you're going to function. Do you function? Do you make decisions? Do you relate to each other as though you and your spouse are one flesh, and the children are part of the family? They have input into the family, but they are not necessarily and inevitably a part of the decision-making process. So it's a matter of how you function. It's not a matter of time. It's a matter of the way the relationship is perceived, especially by the children. Do they think that they think that your home is a democracy and they have equal say? Do they understand? No, we're part of the family, but mom and dad, they're one flesh, and we're not one flesh. They're permanent, we're temporary. I mean, and although mom may spend more time with me, or dad may spend more time with me, at the end of the day, their relationship is the priority relationship in the home, because after all, sooner or later, we're going to be out of here, and then we'll be able to enjoy that one flesh intimacy about which the Bible talks. Now, let me explain to you what happens so often. A lot of times after a couple gets married, and it doesn't always begin with the husband, but more often than not, experience tells me that it does begin with the husband, but sometimes the wife initiates that process. But what happens is, husband gets his wife, he gets his family going, and then in one way or another, he essentially becomes one flesh with his job, or his hunting, or his fishing buddies. All right? In a sense, he kind of, he's finally convinced this woman to marry him. That challenge is over, and rather than, assuming the challenge of making his wife happy and being a good husband and, being the shepherd and priest of the family, he kind of loses sight of that, and he becomes one flesh, as it were, with some other thing or person, functionally. Well, when that happens, what does that typically do to the wife? Well, at that point, then, she is often tempted to develop this unholy alliance with the children. She has this one flesh relationship, as it were, with the children, and she starts confiding in the children, maybe, and making decisions based on what the children want, more than confiding in her husband, more than making decisions based on what her and her husband decide together. And so this is a very, very common dynamic. And once this happens, it sets the stage for the second provocation that I'm going to mention here in a moment. And that is having a child-centered home, by establishing and maintaining a child-centered home. But I'm not ready to go there yet, because there's one more thing I want to say about not having marital harmony. Your lack of marital harmony has as its consequence the defiling influence of bitterness upon the children. If there's bitterness between you and your spouse, you can be sure the children are going to pick up on it. As they observe the resentment that results from your lack of harmony with your spouse, they become more susceptible to acquiring those bitter thoughts and motives and attitudes and words and actions that they see modeled for them. Listen again to Hebrews 12:15. See to it that no one comes short of the grace of God, that no root of bitterness springing up causes trouble, and by it many be defiled. Who do you think are first in line for the defiling impact of bitterness between a husband and a wife? The kids, yeah. All right. So let's talk next about the child-centered home. So at this point in the counseling, maybe I go back over to the whiteboard and I draw a model of two drastically different families. And when I'm done drawing these two families, I'll ask them, okay, now one more time, I'm going to ask you, which of these two models of families best represents your home? Is your home more of a God-centered home, or is it more of a child-centered home? And I want you to think about that as I explain these to you, and I want you to think about that through the eyes of your children. As I describe the difference between a God-centered home and a child-centered home, I want you to think how your children perceive the family. Let's start with the child-centered home. A child-centered home is a home in which a child believes and is allowed to behave as though the entire household, the pets, the siblings, parents, exists for one purpose: to please him. Again, think about it through the mind of your child. Pleasing and serving the child is the dominant theme in this kind of a home. In a child-centered home, children are allowed to routinely interrupt adults while they're talking, to use manipulation and rebellion to get their way, to dictate the family schedule, including meal times, bedtimes, etc. And again, remember what Skip said. Our kids are sinners, and certainly they're going to try to do these things, and these things happen in all of our homes. But what I'm talking about is where this becomes the rule rather than the exception, because the parents, raise their children to believe that this is acceptable, and they don't stop their children they don't correct their children when they continue in these, ungodly kinds of behavior. They're allowed to take precedence over the needs of the spouse. They're allowed to have an equal or overriding vote in all decision-making matters. And I'm certainly not saying you don't get your kids' input on many decisions in life. Decisions that affect them, often it's very good to get their input. But the point is, the Christian home is not a democracy. And at the end of the day, it's up to the mother and the father together to try to determine what God's will is. And yes, sometimes you get the kids involved. That's wise. But they don't get an equal vote in the process. They may get a say, they may get, they may have something to share about it or to contribute to the conversation. But at the end of the day, they don't get an equal vote. In child-centered homes, the children are allowed to demand excessive time and attention from the parents to the exclusion of the parents' other biblical responsibilities. Do your children understand that, yes, you've got a big job in raising them, to teaching them the scriptures? I mean, when you sit down, when you wake up, when you walk by the way, you've got a responsibility. It's an enormous responsibility, as we're going to see tomorrow. But do they understand that God has given you other responsibilities, like to your spouse, to other Christians, or to other people in the church? You've got ministries. God has given you other responsibilities in addition to taking care of them. Do they know that? In child-centered home, children are allowed to speak to their parents as though they were peers. They're allowed to be the dominant influence in the home. They're allowed to be entertained and coddled rather than disciplined out of a bad mood. And by discipline, I don't just mean, physical, corporal discipline or whatever other means you use. I'm just talking about the whole process, the paideo, the whole process of of discipline, which largely involves communication. You know, I forget who said, I guess it was Skip, or maybe it was Jerry, but I mean, you know, parenting is all about having a relationship with your kids. It's really about having a relationship. I guess it was Skip. I mean, if you don't have a relationship with your kids, you're not going to be able to parent the right way. All right, on the other hand, what does a God-centered home look like? A God-centered home is one in which everyone is committed to pleasing and serving God. In a God-centered home, God's desires are exalted over everyone else's, and everyone in the family will be expected to sacrifice personal pleasures when God's will requires it. This philosophy, raising children in a God-centered home, teaches children to serve rather than be served, to honor others rather than be honored, to give rather than take, or be loving rather than to be selfish. In God-centered homes, children are taught the following behaviors. They're taught, for example, and among other things, the joy of serving others. You know, in our home we've said life is ministry. I mean, life is about serving others. To cheerfully obey parents the first time. But let's scratch that. This is what the book says. When I rewrite the book, I'm going to change the word cheerfully, because I've thought about this. Skip, maybe you'll correct me, but, you know, I don't always cheerfully obey God. I think the word should be willingly, to willingly obey their parents, you know, hopefully the first time. Because honestly, I mean, every single day I have to do lots of things that I don't really feel like doing. I have to go against my feelings every single day. The first thing I did this morning, at 4:30 this morning, Alabama time, you know, I went against my feeling. The alarm went off and I had to get out of bed, right? And so I think it's probably a better manifestation of our love for God, or evidence of our love for God, when we obey Him, we don't really feel like it, but we exercise our will and do what He wants us to do, than it is when we actually obey Him because we're really excited to do it. Okay, they're taught to not interrupt parents who are speaking to each other. They're taught to know that they're not always going to get their own way. They're taught to work their schedules around their parents' schedules. No matter where I've counseled, I am amazed at how many Christians just are willing to totally take their biblical priorities and turn them upside down, because they are committed to going to every single ball game, every single ballet practice, every single activity that their children are involved in. Now look, go to as much as you possibly can, but where is it written that you've got to go to every single one? I know Christians who they neglect their spouse in a number of ways. They neglect their church activities. They neglect their other responsibilities because, you know, in their mind they've got to say, I've got to be, if I love my kid, I've got to be at everything they go to. Well, it's not necessarily the case. They're taught to esteem others as more important than themselves. They're taught not to divide parents on disciplinary issues, not to be more intimate with either parent than the parents are with each other. All right, let's do one more before we wrap it up tonight. Let's talk about modeling sinful anger. This is the third, and again, I would say these first three are, in order of importance, 1, 2, and 3 of what I see and have to address most often when I'm helping parents get their environment, the environment in the home, adjusted to be biblical. Again, it says, make no friendship with an angry man, lest you, with a furious man you shall not go, lest you learn his ways. The biggest problem with modeling sinful anger from a practical perspective, of course, you know, it's a sin against God, and that's the most important thing, but is that we teach our children unbiblical ways to handle conflicts. We teach them basically to win rather than to resolve conflicts. And children who regularly observe poor examples of communication often grow up without having the biblical resources with which to resolve conflicts and solve problems. You know, some people think the difference between a good marriage and a bad marriage is in a good marriage there are virtually no conflicts, and in a bad marriage there are lots of them, and I disagree with that. In a good marriage there may be a fair amount of conflicts. It's just that in a good marriage those conflicts are resolved quickly, biblically, and most of all, with a minimum amount of sin. Anyway, I talk about this in this new book that I told you about. But let's talk for a moment about anger. You know, anger is something that God has given us. When we become angry because something triggers our adrenal glands to secrete adrenaline into our bloodstream. And we have all of this energy. Well, I mean, that's a God thing. God put that there. Now, there are good things that can trigger it, and there are bad things that can trigger it. But the fact of the matter is, God gave us anger to help give us more energy in order to address issues and trials and problems in life. Now, there are two extremes that we can go to when we become angry. Sometimes when we become angry, we can internalize the anger. Or to use the theological term, the biblical term, we clam up, right? So what do people in Pittsburgh do when they clam up? Give me some, of course, if you volunteer an answer, we know it's not you, it's somebody that you know, okay, who does this. But like, what do people in Pittsburgh do when they clam up, when they internalize their anger? What do kids do? Yes, sir?
In India, we clench our teeth.
You clench your teeth in India. Okay, all right. We don't do that here, right? All right, thank you. Yes?
Silent treatment.
The silent treatment, all right. Or we have another term for that, having to do with the part of our anatomy. What do we call it? The cold shoulder. Let's pretend you're a biblical counselor and someone says, well, yeah, I kind of give my husband a silent treatment and I kind of give him the cold shoulder. Well, do you think that's the right thing to do? And I know it's not the right thing to do. Well, why? What's the sin that's committed when you give somebody the cold shoulder? All right, well, let me help you out. When you give someone the cold shoulder, it's as if you're saying this to him. You turkey, I've told you I don't know how many times in how many different ways how much it really bothers me when you do that or don't do that, but you don't get it. You don't have a clue. So the only thing I know to do is to give you a taste of your own medicine. And when I think you have an inkling as to how much it bugs me when you do that, maybe I'll start talking to you again in a day or two. So what is that called? What's the sin behind that? It's vindictive, right? And one way or another, when you give someone the cold shoulder, that is the essence of what's behind the cold shoulder. It's a vindictive act. Rather than sitting down and talking to the person and trying to reason it out and explain to him exactly what you're going to punish him for what he's done to irritate you. What else do people do when they are clamming up? They leave, right? They'll just maybe walk out, go for a walk, go for a drive. Kids will sulk or pout, cry. All right, well, the other extreme is not to internalize, but to ventilate, or to use the technical term, we blow up. So what do people in Pittsburgh do when they blow up? Nobody in Pittsburgh gets sinfully angry and blows up. I think I'm going to change my workshop tomorrow to, I wrote a little booklet on deception and, like dishonesty. Maybe we should, what do you do? What do people you know do? All right, slam doors. What else?
Raise your voice.
Raise your voice. Call people names. Use profanity. Biting sarcasm, right? What do kids do? They throw things, they hit, they kick, they bite. All right, well, both of these are sinful responses to anger. Again, think, what do I do when I'm angry at my kids? I mean, how do I model sinful anger for them? And by the way, you can mix and match these. Some people, they blow up, and after they blow up, they clam up. They go on a 3-day sulk. And some people, they clam up until I can't take it anymore, and then they blow up. So you can mix and match these things. But they're both destructive. God didn't give us anger, the ability to get anger. And by the way, anger appears in the Bible like a gazillion times. Like I've counted. I just went through recently, a few months ago, all the different words that I could remember that have to do, the Greek and the Hebrew words that have to do with anger. I found over 1,000 words or appearances of anger in one way or another. Now, a lot of those angry instances have to do with God being angry. But if you factor them all out, there's probably almost 600 or over 600 different manifestations of anger that people can have. More occurrences than the second greatest emotion identified in the Bible, which is fear, which is like 389 appearances. And most of those appearances of anger of man in the Bible are the sinful variety. There are a few verses that talk about righteous indignation and righteous anger, but most of the anger, so righteous anger is kind of a hard thing to come by, but it does really exist. When Paul was in Athens and he was provoked because the city was totally given over to anger. Well, that provoked is an anger kind of a word. Be angry and do not sin, right? Jesus turned and looked at them in anger. Okay, so it's sort of like God gave us a dart, right? And this anger is sort of like a dart. And when we internalize the anger, it's like we're swallowing the dart. And when we internalize the anger, it's like we're swallowing the dart. When we ventilate the anger, it's like we're throwing the dart at the other person. And that's not why God gave us anger. Why do you think He gave us anger? What's the purpose? What does He want us to do when we are, let's just say, righteously angry? What's that? Fix things, right. He wants us to learn how to get the anger under the Spirit's control and to direct it towards the problem. So as J. Adams says, God gave us anger that we might destroy or attack something. He expects us to get that anger under the Spirit's control and to attack the problem. But since the thing that makes us angry much more often than not are things that people do or people say, people are usually somehow involved in the mix. I mean, sometimes we get angry at, things, but most of the time we get angry at people, right? Things that they do, things that they don't do. Something's always necessary to get the anger from our heart to the problem. Anybody want to guess what that is? If you read my book, tell me. Communication. Right. We've got to learn how to get the Spirit in control of things and to communicate. When you stop and think about it, when you clam up, you're not communicating. I mean, you're communicating something, but you're really not communicating. When you blow up, you're miscommunicating. And so God doesn't want us to swallow the dart. He doesn't want us to throw the dart at the other person. He wants us to throw the dart, as it were, at the problem. And so here's the bottom line. If you have an anger problem, if your children have an anger problem, there is no hope for your learning how to handle that problem and solve that anger problem apart from your learning how to communicate. And tomorrow, I guess it's going to be in the workshop, we're going to talk a little bit about communication. The Bible has more to say about communication than most of us realize. We, as Christians, ought to be the best communicators in the world because there's so much in the Bible about communication. All right. Well, I think we need to stop there. We'll pick up with the rest of these. Well, actually, in the book, there are like 22 or 25 provocations. I think we're just going to cover 10, so we'll probably do the last 7 tomorrow. And I'm hoping to finish a little early so we can maybe do some Q&A. All right? All right, is anybody coming up after me, or do I? Okay, very good.